welcome to the Uncle's Channel. Thanks for watching today. Let's do a quick review of The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom for the Nintendo Switch. Now, for me personally, this is the best non-remake Legend of Zelda game on the system. And I know, like, for some people, that's true blasphemy because Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are like gaming perfection to them. And while I'll acknowledge those are good games in their own right, for me personally, I missed the old school Zelda games of my youth, and I was afraid when those games came out and had like such positive reception that the games that I enjoyed or the traditional format was just simply going to be lost. However, enter in Echoes of Wisdom, an old school Zelda game. They have the same engine as the Link's Awakening remake, and for the first time ever, except for those Philips CDI games, we get to play as Zelda as the main protagonist here, setting out to save Link, who's been sucked up by this magical rift that's traveling across Hyrule, and so we're trying to defeat the rifts, conquer them all, rescue Link, and rescue the land of Hyrule and the world in general. And I can't say like the story is like a fantastic story. It's a pretty average story. It's not like a Link's Awakening story. I mean, that's like one of the greatest Zelda stories of all time. But the story for Echoes of Wisdom is good enough to keep the story rocking in order to find all these eccentric characters and the overall charm that the game has to offer. But the main aspect of the game that I love so much is just simply going to be the gameplay for this, because they took the traditional Zelda style of gameplay and really just sort of flipped it on its head here. And you can play like a traditional sword fight in some aspects or some parts, but for the most part, you're going to have a staff and a little star friend named Tri, and together you can summon different echoes to help fight the battles for you or to navigate the landscape. Now, what are echoes in the game? Echoes are pretty much any object or enemy that you've encountered, and you can memorize that object or you can memorize that enemy, and you can summon it with your staff at any given time. Now, the objects you can summon to help you navigate the landscape, like at one point you'll be stacking beds like almost endlessly in order to like break the boundaries or to get to new areas, but we'll get to more of that in just a second. And then the enemies are going to be more of any enemy that you've defeated, you can then summon later on in battle to fight for you on your team against future enemies. And to me, this is probably like one of the most fun parts of the entire game. It reminded me a little bit of like the old school Pokemon games, like where you're going through it, you encounter a brand new Pokemon, you're like, man, that fella is powerful, I have to have that creature on my team. And of course, you capture that Pokemon, you can fight with it in your future battles. Same thing here, you see an enemy in the game, you're like, I have to have that enemy on my team. You defeat them for one single time, memorize the echo, and you can summon that enemy at any point to win all types of battles for you in the future. There's just something very powerful feeling about that, and just simply standing back and watching these creatures and these monsters fight for you is just a dream come true in these Zelda games. And I have always enjoyed playing as mages and summoners and like my RPGs like Diablo and games like that. And so to be able to do it in a Zelda game, it's just simply a great experience through and through. And like I said earlier, you can use the objects to break boundaries and solve puzzles. You can also use the monsters that you summon to break boundaries and solve those puzzles as well. Take, for example, this little crawling spider and whatnot. You can summon the spider, attach yourself to it with Tri's power here, and the spider would just simply climb the wall. And when it climbs the wall, you can travel across pretty much all of Hyrule with this one little spider here, and just simply breaking the boundaries and traveling everywhere in the world you're not technically supposed to travel to yet. There's something very freeing about it, and just makes it way more fun inside of a game. Like when the early levels of the game and you travel to some area you know you're not supposed to be at yet, and the enemies are super powerful, and you spend like a solid 5 minutes killing one individual enemy just simply to learn that enemy's echo. Then you can go back to the beginning of the game and summon that powerful echo and just rampage through it. I don't know, it's just wonderful, and I enjoy games that give you that freedom to not necessarily like break the game, but I guess it is breaking the game to a degree, but the game allows you to break the game, and I really appreciate Nintendo creating that experience for us. And I know like Breath of the Wild did it, or Tears of the Kingdom did it with all their gadgets and whatnot, but that's like a different type of game. That's a 3D Zelda game. I want it in an old school retro Zelda game with the retro feel, and they really brought it to life. Now, I have seen some complaints out there that say the echo system, as far as like selecting which echo you want to use, is a very cumbersome experience and just simply not very fun, because there's like 300 echoes inside the game. So you load it up and you're just scrolling through all these echoes to figure out like which one you want to use, and it's like confusing trying to figure out like where they're located at. I didn't have that issue like in any form or fashion. There are different ways you can sort your echoes. You can do like the most used, most recently acquired, most recently used, things like that. And so if you just simply use the sorting system, like you can find the echo you want pretty darn fast. And I will acknowledge I play a lot of like old school retro games, from like the early 90s, late 80s. And so I'm probably more forgiving of a cumbersome menu, but to me this felt like pretty, current day menu system. So I don't personally see the criticism on that, but you can let me know in the comments down below if you agree with the menu being just a tad bit cumbersome there. Now, like I said earlier, you don't necessarily have to use the echoes for combat. You eventually do get your traditional sword. You can enter into what's called sword fighting mode, and you get your regular bow and arrow, you get your sword, you get your shield. You have a little bit higher of a jump as well, and you only have like a certain amount of time you can use fighter mode, and you have to accumulate more of the resource in order to replenish that. But you can keep upgrading it and get your fighter mode to last longer and longer, and you'll never be able to like play the entire game in fighter mode, but you do get to the point where you can fight most of the boss battles with your traditional swords and shield if you choose to go that route. Now, me personally, I find the echo so much fun. I don't know why you really want to go back to fighter mode, but hey, I mean, to each their own. But I probably went through 95% of the game with echoes without even journeying into fighter mode, even though like I kept getting resources to replenish it. It was almost always full because I was like, why am I going to do that when I have all these powerful creatures to fight all these enemies for me? But now let's talk about the graphics in the game, because they are using the same game engine as the Link's Awakening remake. And I honestly felt when they put that remake out, it was the perfect way to update the Game Boy version of Link's Awakening. And the Game Boy version of Link's Awakening is like one of my all-time favorite Zelda games, if not my favorite. And so I was very particular on how they updated it. But when they updated to this, I guess how you would describe Rudolph in the Isle of Misfit Toys polished look, I thought that was like the perfect way to go about a dream world for Link's Awakening. And so I really didn't want them to just simply set on that game engine, not do any other games with it. And so creating a completely original game with the same game engine was just simply genius in my opinion. Now, they did upgrade a few of the graphics here and there, but it's not going to be a massive change from Link's Awakening. And I know that some people said the graphics have been upgraded enough that the frame rate begins to suffer. I didn't notice any of that. I'm not really one to pull apart or pick apart the frame rates here, but I never noticed it being inconsistent with like the inputs I was pushing on the controller. And so frame rate was a zero issue for me as I was traveling through the game. And I think for most players who are not really thinking about frame rate, you're probably not going to notice it. I sometimes think that frame rate's a little bit too I don't know, hyped up in the gaming community. But for me personally, I thought the frame rate was, well, dadgum, I thought the frame rate was wonderful. Now, also, since they are using the same game engine as Link's Awakening remake, they're able to put some of the same sprites in there for like Easter eggs and whatnot. And so there are some callbacks to the first game and little Easter eggs to find. And I always enjoy when games do that. And so I was pleased that they actually brought back some of the memories of it. Is that to say that this takes place in the same island as Link's Awakening? I don't believe it does. I mean, they talk about Hyrule in the game, so obviously it doesn't take place in the same world as Link's Awakening. So how does this stuff get from the dream world into the real world of Hyrule? I don't know, maybe that's a different video for a different day. But overall, I personally adore this particular Zelda game. I enjoy it that they bring back the old school Zelda style, but updating it, changing the gameplay mechanics, sort of flipping on its head a little bit, so it feels familiar, but it feels new at the same time. And that's exactly what I want from a Nintendo game of this particular generation. I mean, it feels like they are really trying to appease old school Zelda fans, but not just simply regurgitate a old classic and do the same thing over. They're still trying to be creative at the same time. And I mean, that's what Nintendo has always done, and something that I admire about the company in general. But what do you all think? Are you enjoying Echoes of Wisdom? Are you glad Nintendo's going back to an old 2D top-down Zelda style? Or you prefer to simply put their resources and money toward a brand new 3D Zelda? Let me know in the comments down below. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Check out my other videos listed up above, and go out there, find a great game to play. Simply have a great rest of the day.